Welcome to today's EnRoute webinar. Today we will be discussing the EnRoute component creator. And as usual, Aaron Clapp will be our presenter. Aaron is in charge of all training here at SAI and knows everything about EnRoute. He's been using it for a long time, part of the technical support and development, looking new features, and he's been doing a lot of training on it over the years. And so we'll have his presentation about the component creator. And then if you have any other questions, either about the component creator or about anything else in EnRoute, after he's done, we'll open it up for those questions, and you can just type them into the chat window there, and he'll be happy to answer as many as we have time for. And that'll wrap it up. We will be recording today's webinar as usual, and we'll post that to our YouTube channel and send everyone a link to the recording. So if you want to review it later or share it with someone else, we'll send you the link in an email. And with that, we'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so just as a little bit of a precursor here, we've been in the last few webinars talking about 3D type objects and tool pathing 3D objects and creating those. We're going to use a little bit of 3D in this. It doesn't require you to do any tool pathing of 3D, but if you haven't checked out our previous episodes on how to create a 3D relief, I recommend that you check that out after this webinar so you can kind of get a better idea of what we're doing when we go to the creation of 3D parts here. This component creator is a 2D/3D tool. It allows you to create two-dimensional shapes that you can cut out to create a three-dimensional type object. Now, the first obvious case scenario for this this particular tool is going to be like shelves or something like that, but this could be very well opened up to just about any other kind of custom pattern that you may want to create. So to start out with, let's take a look at where it's at. So the first thing we'll need to do is actually have something drawn on screen before we can actually get to the component creator. The component creator in your EnRoute is going to be right above the draw polygon. Now, I do believe you do have to have the complete subscription, or I believe you also have to have the pro version of the software for it to show up. So if you have plus, it may not show up. So just be aware of that. So either the complete for subscription or the pro version. So first of all, we're going to start out with just drawing a square here, and we're just going to go with something like 20 by 20. We're just going to place it on screen here, and this is what we'll use to get us started. So once I have something drawn on screen, whether I've imported that in or I've drawn it in EnRoute, I can select it, and now my component creator or my create components option becomes available. When I click on this, I'm going to get a bunch of parameters down below, and then I get a grid on screen. So here is where we can choose the XY position of the grid as we change it around. So if we move this up and down like this, we can create the position in the X and the Y. So this is where you would fine tune that if you wanted to do that via coordinates. Now, the other thing that we can do here is we can also define how deep, wide, and tall we want this to be. So in this first example, we'll just do a 5 by 5. I can also go and change my position by a more of a graphic way. So I can grab some of these nodes and move them around. Let's see here. Oops. Keep accidentally hitting the tab button there. If we decide to change the position here, we may have to reset. So in this case, now I can move this over. But if you're looking for more accurate results, you'd want to use the position here. So I can also use my cursor to move things around. Now you'll notice that every once in a while these little red dots appear. These are places where it's not compatible. So you can't actually create this part. What you need to do is adjust something so that the piece here is going to be long enough to actually be able to create a joint right here. And you'll kind of see how that works here in a second. So visually, I'm going to say, let's go 5 by 5. And I'm just going to grab this by hand and kind of put these in here so that they're kind of even like this. Some of these options in here. So this crosshatch option, if I uncheck it, it will only put the horizontal lines in. Whereas if I choose to crosshatch, I can do my vertical ones as well. The return, the notch, the layout, the label, and the model, these are all things that you can add or remove. So for example, if you want a notch or a return, you can choose to put those in there. And then you can define the glue gap, the notch gap, and your material thickness over here. Over here, we've got the dish layout. We'll talk about dish here in a minute when we get to the 3D part. But we have the layout, the label, and the model. The layout is kind of how it's laid out in terms of a three-dimensional-ish type piece. The label is whether you want those pieces labeled or not. And then the model would be a three-dimensional model of the way that it looks. Now, the difference between the layout and the model would be that the layout actually has all of the labels on it so that you can actually see which parts go where. And you'll see that here in a second. So I'm just going to leave everything here by default for the moment. And I can hit apply. So I'm going to go into my perspective view, or my 4-point view here. And I'm going to click on the little light bulb under my 3D render toolbar. You might also find that under surface rendered view. So here again, in my perspective view, you can see that this is the shelf that it created. So it created a nice little shelf type unit or a box type unit with shelves. And then if we look here, this is how this piece would go together if we were putting it together. And these are where each part numbers would go. So we've got them labeled just like this. So if you have any questions about which piece goes where, they're labeled and numbered. And the great thing is here is over to the right, it creates all the pieces that you would need in order to create this piece. So I've got all my parts. Now all I have to do is nest and toolpath these and send them to my router. All 2D cuts. So everything you do in here will create two-dimensional cuts to create a three-dimensional-ish type shape, or a three-dimensional type shelf, or some kind of component. So that's the idea here, is that it is kind of 3D-ish, but you can also do this, but it also creates a 2D part so that you can cut all it out very easily. Let's go back here. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to create a slightly different shape. We'll just go with a circle here. Again, I'm going to go to my component creator. And this time, maybe let's do one without the crosshatch. Down here, by the way, we can also set our Z height. So right now, these little shelves are going to be 5 inches in depth. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to hit apply. And when we go to our rendered view here, zoom out a little bit, it's created several parts and shapes based off of that right there. And so again, we could go back and we could do this with a crosshatch. So that's the way it would look like if you didn't do the crosshatch. If we do apply the crosshatch in this section, we get something like this. So this is a pretty basic tool, and it looks like we've got some really small and tight little pieces here. We would probably want to be careful about certain things like this. So we would probably want to adjust our height or our dimensions just a little bit to avoid potential problems like this. But the idea is here you get the general shape, and then you get this here, and then all the parts that you need to print out right here on screen with all their labels and everything. So where does the 3D part come into this? Well, that's a good question. So let's jump into an example with 3D. So this is where this tool really starts to become kind of unique in that it can do a ton of crazy stuff when you combine it with three-dimensional objects. So I'm going to go ahead and take my circle here, and I'm going to add a relief to it. I'm going to say add relief, round relief, and let's do a scale to height, and let's do 5 inches since that's the depth that we were using by default. We'll do 5 inches and apply. So if we look at this in the perspective view, got ourselves a nice little dome here, and we're going to create a shell that's based off of that. So now that I've created that, I'm going to go back to my top view. I'm going to highlight my 3D object, and you'll notice that when I highlight the 3D object, my component creator also becomes available. So I can hit my component creator now, and I can define some things in here. I'm going to leave my Z depth at 5, and this time I'm going to leave the dish option off, and we're going to show you what the dish option will do here in a moment. So I'm going to say leave the angle and everything the same, and hit apply. So now what this has done is it has taken this shape, this conical shape, and it has added, of course, I told it to go 5 inches tall, so it's going to add a 5-inch return on the height of this. So if I put it at 0, it would have exactly followed the shape here, but I added 5 inches. So now we've got a nice rounded pattern here, and then I've got all my parts with a flat bottom. Now here's where the difference between dish and the non-dish option is that everything in this case right here is has a flat bottom. So if I move these over, I'm going to copy these over and then just delete these because we're going to use the same shape over here, and we'll take a look and compare the differences between the two. So I'm going to turn on my component creator again, same settings. The only difference is I'm going to turn on dish, hit apply. So what the dish does, as you can now see, is that it actually creates the parts with the back of the piece following the shape of the rounded piece. So if we take a look at the perspective view again, so over here we have our original part. All the backings are flat. And then here's our new part that we just processed. So we have the same arc on the top, but this time it also created the same thing on the back side. So now we've got a concave shape on the back. So we've got we've got a mirror on both sides. So this kind of will create a kind of a unique effect if you don't want a flat backing to it. And then of course, just as usual, we have all of our parts listed here, 2D parts, and then our drawing on how to put it together. So we can see here, H3, H2, these are horizontal, and then we have V3, V1, V2, V5, those are our vertical parts. So that's the difference between your dish and your and non-dish options, and so you can kind of know what those are about. Now, let's take a look at another example here. I'm going to load up a file. Let's see here. I'm going to load up a texture that I've created. So we've got a 3D texture that we've gone together on here, and we've got, we take a look here. So we've got kind of a crazy, and the reason why I wanted to bring this particular example is that you can get as crazy with this as you really want to. You don't have to be limited by, simple designs or anything like that. You can use pretty much any 3D object you want to create one of these shells or one of these components. Let's go ahead in here, and maybe let's split these up to maybe 10 by 10 instead. Kind of even these out here a little bit. So here's another option that we'll kind of demonstrate real quick. If we want to change the angle of our lines, we can do that with the angle setting right here. Now this is going to create some interesting little pieces here, but let's try that. And let's go and add the Z height. Let's just add 1 inch this time. We don't want to go quite as high because this is a pretty significant height as is. We'll let that process. Let's see, this is, you know what? I did not make the, that made something very interesting. I wasn't quite expecting that. I need to make my things a little bit deeper, I think. So that created some interesting shapes. I'm not sure how you would use that, but see, it's another option that you have. This tool has infinite possibilities. I didn't even think about creating something like this, but that's interesting. Let's try going back though, and let's start and give ourselves a little bit more height. Let's here. Flip creator. We'll go back to 5 here. Oh, you know what? I also had the dish option selected, so that makes a big difference too. Let's do fly. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the dish option is what made it create those super thin, super thin lines, because it was taking the backside and also pulling those up to the backside of the with the shape. So here we've got let's go full screen. So now we have a unique looking component. Now again, the most obvious thing that I can think of at the moment, that it would be shelves and different things like that. But what we've seen this used for with different customers and things like that is that they can create all kinds of sorts of things. So we have seen, for example, people create using the 3D to create large desks for entryways or for reception areas, and they've taken the crosshatch section out, or if they did use a crosshatch section, they spaced it out very significantly, and they created a very unique opening piece for a lobby or something like that. We've also seen people use these for ceiling tiles or ceiling patterns or wall patterns. You can also do all kinds of crazy things. Of course, you can also do like shelving units. I've seen some people use this to create little shelves for Matchbox or Hot Wheels cars, or collectible toys and things like that. So you can use this for all sorts of things, and it really doesn't matter. You've got a vast array of textures and things that you can use at your disposal to create any one of these parts. And the great thing is you don't have to get into 3D toolpathing or do any of that. All the work is done for you by simply adding in and creating these little parts for you. Again, if we want to make this a little bit thicker, let's take this back. Let's delete these. Let's set our angle at 0 this time. Let's set our depth at 5 inches. Let's make sure that these are kind of evenly lined up here. In fact, what I think I might do is I might go, let's go with 12 by 12. And yeah, that way I get a little bit better of a pattern. I don't want too many panels in here. Apply. Go back to our perspective view here. And so that time I put in a return height of 5 inches, so it gave me a lot taller design, but it still follows this same shape. So you can create some very unique and interesting designs just based off of any 3D object or any 2D object. Let's go back and let's actually take a look at, and I have actually not tried this, but I'm kind of curious to find out what we see. So I'm just going to draw an interesting or a weird shape. Okay, so that's just a strange shape, and we'll scale this down. I really don't know what this is going to do, but again, we can take pretty much any shape we want. Let's reduce these down to maybe 5 by 5 again. This one might be a little bit tricky in some spots to accommodate. There we go. And just like that, you have somewhat interesting design there. So, like I said, any shape, doesn't matter if you draw it by hand, if you import it via DXF, any shape that any object you can bring in, you can create a pattern or a component with it. So any object that's a closed contour can be used to create components. And again, when it comes to tool pathing, if we're going to go that route, we decide that this is what we want. Move these out of the way. We have our original shape. So if we wanted to actually create like a backing piece, we can toolpath this piece separately. We can have a backing to it, or even a front piece that would lock everything together. So if we want that backing piece on the back there, or if we go through here, we can take these parts, nest them, toolpath them, and then send them to our machine just like this. Now they do come grouped together, so I'm going to ungroup these. And each, the good thing here is that each part is individually grouped. So when I select this part, it also groups its text. So if I wanted to nest these, all I would have to do is select those parts, go into my nesting option. Yes, we'll convert those to curves. Oops. I need to move these outside of the plate so it doesn't recognize them as holes. And we're going to just say quantity of 1, multiple sheets if necessary. Maybe we'll do a gap of 0.5 inches, or 0.5 inches. No, 90 degrees is all we want in this case. And just like that, now we've nested all those pieces. This is ready to cut. We can toolpath it, send it along its way, and it's ready to go. So this is the basic essentials of the component creator. Again, you can do all kinds of things like turn on and off. If you don't want to see the layout and some of these things, you can turn some of these on and off. So you've got options here. You can adjust your gapping settings if you want to pull that in closer or leave it wider, depending on what you want to do. So very flexible. It's kind of one of those tools that once you get it into your hands and you start to play with it a little bit, the possibilities of different things you can do with it are kind of infinite. And it kind of just, it almost relies on the creativity of the user to kind of find very unique and interesting ways to apply this different tool to create different parts. So that essentially in its basic form is the component creator. Again, like I said, if you had missed out on the 3D options and you were curious a little bit more about how to integrate the 3D part into EnRoute, check out that other webinar. We go over extensively on the basics of reliefs, which really that's all you really need if you wanted to get into the 3D part of it. Is just watch that first one that we did on the intro to reliefs, and that will get you pretty much set to do anything that you need here. Do we have any questions?
Style notching.
A different style of notching? You know what? We don't, but that is an interesting request. This is the only style of notching we have available currently at the moment.
Okay. And then Paul said,
I believe it's
glue gap. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, go ahead with your question, but I think if we, I was just going to do a little example here, and we'll take off the notch. Okay, so if you take off the notch, it just removes the notches, and then you can kind of do your own notch or a different notch if you want to kind of do that on your own.
Okay. So the other question was, is the glue gap to be used where parts intersect so as not to be too tight?
Yeah, so the glue gap is going to be the amount of gap that you want to allow for gluing when you assemble the parts. That you can also use this to control how tight the parts fit together. And then just kind of a little bit of a clarification there on the notch gap. The notch gap is basically the amount of gap that you need to allow your tool to cut, so that the tool dimension does not interfere with the assembled joint. So a good value to be used would be the radius of the tool that you plan on using for the cutout of the parts. So that would be a good option there.
Okay. So a question from Brandon said, can you vary the spacing to have different size openings within the same setup?
You mean by, like, for example, instead of them all being the same? So like when we say 5 by 5, say have some of them over here at 5 and some of them at 10. Okay. At the moment, no. But that's actually a good question, though, and that's actually a good feature. Varying gaps.
Yes.
And then the other question was different types of notches.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Those are two really good ideas, actually. Different style of notches and varying gaps between the parts. Maybe you could do like a gradient variant. So you could do shorter on one side and more on the other, or you could do like a circular pattern or certain things like that. So yeah, that actually would be kind of an interesting option. I'll have to see. I'll definitely mention this to develop, because those are actually two pretty good ideas that would give you a little more flexibility, even more than there already is. So.
Okay. Excellent. Are there any other questions that you have for Aaron today? Well, Aaron, I think you've covered everything. Thank you so much for going over all that. And everyone, thank you for your questions about it. We really do appreciate you spending time with us today. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Our next EnRoute webinar will be next month on October 13th. And we'll be looking at cutting in 2.5D in EnRoute. And so that'll be the same time, Tuesday at 10 o'clock. We'll send out an email with the invite. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Thank you, Aaron, and we'll see you next month.